something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop, children. What's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.
Salutations, good morning, and welcome, New Haven and Connecticut and the world over there. This is your host, the Readman, Jesse Turner, and you're listening to the Truth to Power Hour on 103.5 WNHH, New Haven, Connecticut, and we're about to kind of do the Wizard of Oz thing, where Toto pulled the curtain back from the wizard and Dorothy and the Scarecrow and the Lion and the Tin Man. All of a sudden, they realized it wasn't this big giant in front of them, but a little old man on the side. So we're going to do a little bit today. My guest today is Dr. Rachel Gabriel, professor of literacy, and you got at least a half dozen books. I don't know how many articles. There's got to be. You're beyond the 50, maybe rising to 60. You'll be at 100 before we can blink. Peer-reviewed stuff, and you also edit journals, and you do all those good things. Mm-hmm. And why I'm happy to have Dr. Gabrielle here is it's hard to find in literacy independent voices that really just delve into the research and tell it like it is. This is a field where we can get favor and attention and promotions and even make lots of money if we just say the right things over there. And so, Dr. Gabrielle, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your passions and some of the things you do?
I'd love to. Thank you. I'm so glad to be here with you, Dr. Turner. My name's Rachel Gabriel. I'm a professor of literacy education at the University of Connecticut. In Storrs, I teach in our reading specialist certification program, our literacy specialist certification program, which operates out of our Hartford campus. So I'm between the two. And I have two young kids in public schools in Connecticut. So I have some vested interest on multiple levels and what's going on with instruction in our schools here. I've been thinking a lot about the ways that policies that are written at the state and local levels set and limit what counts as good reading instruction and what kind of reading instruction is possible. Increasingly, I've been interested and concerned about what counts as good writing instruction and what kinds of writing instruction are possible. Because the way that reading policies or literacy policies are written are mostly written to kind of legislate the reading side of things. There's very little legislation. In fact, I'm not sure there's any that prescribes what kind of writing instruction should happen. And yet the writing side has this reciprocal relationship with reading, so it has a big potential influence on how reading develops. But then also, like, we're asking kids to kind of develop a skill with one hand tied behind their back and hopping on one foot if we're not investing equally in the quality and the scope of writing instruction. So we have this right to read bill. We may all have the right to recognize words soon. Maybe. It was a significant and expensive endeavor, and expensive in all sort of senses of the word. Expensive because districts had to buy stuff. Expensive because they had to invest their professional development funding, but also the professional development time in preparing their teachers to use this new stuff that they bought. Expensive because it took a lot of attention. There were a lot of advocacy efforts on both sides of this issue. And so a lot of attention and energy and time from people invested in the process of getting this to happen in the way that it did when it did. And so now we are sort of living it for the first year or two. And we are beginning to get information on how schools are living it. But we don't have a ton of information on the impact of it yet. We just are beginning to kind of get a sense of what it cost us. So I appreciate the the LinkedIn post that you put up, Dr. Turner, about, we've spent, something like $144 million on
Yeah,
this so
I
far.
remember that number was to me at a time when districts were laying off. We have so many urban districts without librarians now.
Yep.
In Bridgeport, in Hartford, in so many places.
Yep.
And I'm like, we're laying off librarians, we're laying off teachers, we're laying off reading specialists, we're laying off special education
Yes.
teachers.
Yes.
At this time, and it's always been strange to me. There was some research in the '80s in New Jersey, site-based management, and that was where the money went to the school district, and the school district could develop what they needed. And places like one of the school districts was Union City, New Jersey, and it invested that money by taking all the teachers from K to 12 to say you're going to get a certification, an advanced degree in one of three areas, either ESL, bilingual, or literacy.
Yeah.
And they did have an impact. That research, they used that money to send all their teachers through and when the difference between going to a training for letters and getting you work with literacy special, we're talking about 2 years intensive training at least. And so in that time they transformed their school district, and they're and the stuff that they always do, look at the test scores, they did have significant increases, 40% increases.
Yeah.
And I'm the guy that usually argues, look, the assessments we use are going to show failure in 5-6 years time. They're meant to. This is the way they are. A norm reference, even a criteria reference assessment, it relies on showing that a majority of our readers have to be failures. Otherwise, you can't standardize it. So sometimes I call it Groundhog Day, and I know it's going to be a Groundhog Day. When I was in Massachusetts, I testified for MTA there, and I remember with the legislatures, I said, well, welcome to Groundhog Day, and I guarantee you, within 6 years, you'll be back here blaming teachers, blaming the curriculum, blaming whatever you advocate for today for failure, and you don't understand the assessment things. But this idea of reading and writing connections, it's just natural. In terms, I remember when I came to Connecticut, they used to have a cast a spell program. Like you, I would observe teachers and see my teachers, and they pull a whiteboard and they give a word, I don't know, dissatisfaction or something, which would be difficult for the kids to spell. And they would say, let's sound it out. What do you think it starts with? But it did have a connection. When I watched it, I saw kids had to think about. They had to think about letters and sounds and patterns. And they really had to think about spelling. Now, I don't know how successful the program was, because it's like all these things. There's no real data there. It's interesting to me when we did the Reading First schools with George Bush, there was an element that looked at the data. And there's a reason we don't have Reading First schools anymore. Because much of the kinds of what Reading First schools are doing, a lot of the things we're advocating for literacy instruction today. Intensive systematic phonics program. And at the end of 6 years, they discovered that the Reading First schools were K to 3 schools. We did them for 6 years, $6 billion. But the comprehension went down in every single grade in those schools. So it's kind of interesting to me. But because they had a research component tied to it, they couldn't continue it, because what happened is those schools were looked at as failures. And sometimes I wonder, where's that research on it? As we're doing things like, I don't know, letters or whatever the training we're asking our Connecticut teachers to do, do we have a research component? Because I looked at something you were looking for. I think you said, I can't find any studies on, I don't know, maybe it's letters, one of the programs. Could you tell us about that? Is there
absolutely.
research component?
Connecticut so letters is a professional development, put that in quotations or air quotes, professional development. It's a training program, and it's a training program that is written into a bunch of state laws. It's not in Connecticut state law. So teachers in North Carolina and in maybe they're still sort of talking about this in Michigan and a handful of other places, by law have to go through this letters program, which is 1 or 2 years of online modules, like 30 something hours of online modules that take them through essentially the same content that's in the Foundations of Reading test that teachers have to take to get licensed in the first place. And so there's a lot of talk about letters because it has a lot of it has won most of the state contracts. If a state's awarding a state level contract, it's going to letters. I can't find another example of one that is written into legislation. It was part of the strategy that was used in Mississippi, and a lot of folks talk about the Mississippi miracle. And what you were saying about Groundhog Day reminded me of how Paul Thomas is a researcher from South Carolina. He's been talking about how the media basically has two stories it knows how to tell about reading: crisis and miracle, and we'll just hear those like circling each other. Yeah, so this the Mississippi miracle is similar in some ways to the Texas miracle that got George Bush elected president the second, in that it is not so much a miracle, but it is a phenomenon. And that phenomenon, there's new reporting, an article in the Atlantic in the last month, and then lots of sort of think pieces online about how it's much less of a miracle and more of a marathon, I think is the metaphor that they used in that Atlantic article, at least, about how this is really the result of kind of 20 years of intensive reform efforts. It's not because they did letters training or because they changed to a science of reading focused curriculum. And in fact, the piece that is most interesting about the way that the Mississippi miracle, in quotations, happens is that they did this as a comprehensive effort. And this sort of shows up all over the place in reading reform. Like they've got literacy coaches who are supporting curriculum, who are supporting the training, and they have funding for not only for personnel, but for materials, not only for materials, but for training, and all of those things at once. And Mississippi school system's chronically underfunded for a long, long, long time. So this huge investment and sustained investment from private foundations makes a significant difference there. Now, Connecticut has not been in that situation. We are not chronically underperforming as a state. We're not chronically underfunded as a state. Some of our districts are. We have this difference, this gap. And so you can imagine that if a place that has had, really chaotic infrastructure and no support for a very long time has sustained attention and resources for a sustained period of time, things look really different there after they've got that sustained support. But even Mississippi did letters for a few years and then decided to change to a new vendor. So in the meantime, people are trying to kind of copy what happened there, not paying attention to the context in which it happened. And they're jumping on the letters bandwagon. The bandwagon here is a little bit different. Letters has a handful of studies, one recent one, which reiterates everything else that we've known about it for a long time, which is that you can show on their own internal assessment, teacher knowledge goes up at the end of the program. So when you clickety-click your way through this online program, you can clickety-click more multiple choice questions correct at the end than you did at the beginning. Woohoo! There's no impact on instruction or achievement. They've known that since the beginning of doing letters training. The founder did an evaluation study of it one of the founders, as part of their dissertation research, and found the same thing. And people have been looking at this in peer-reviewed research and also in dissertation research and a bunch of master's thesis research studies, and found the same thing, that teachers can earn better scores on the internal assessments, but we're not seeing any difference in the classroom. And there's a couple ways to understand that. One of them is, well, don't buy letters if your goal is to have an impact on classroom instruction. The other is, maybe letters is doing a set of content that isn't going to have a huge influence on classroom instruction. Maybe it's background information, you're not going to see it. In which case, why are we paying for it? Because we already have a measure that tells us, at the point of licensure at least, all of our teachers know this stuff. You couldn't pass Foundations of Reading and still need letters. we've had foundations of reading or something like it in place for long enough that we know that at least at the level of clickety click on the online module, our teachers know this stuff. The question of can and do they use it is a question of integration and infrastructure. Do they have materials that are aligned and supportive? Do they have leadership that is coherent and aligned? Do they have a schedule that allows for them to do this kind of work? And also, is it significantly different than what they already did and already knew to do? There's this huge assumption behind the science of reading movement that we could characterize what kind of teaching happened in every classroom across the country or even within one state. We have no idea. We sometimes know what districts buy, but that doesn't mean anything about what teachers do on an everyday basis. We sometimes know what states allow, but that again doesn't really change sort of what teachers are saying and doing for their kids on an everyday basis. Some districts can't tell you exactly how long they have allocated for literacy on their schedule until you go ask the building principal. So it's not as if, we have this sort of nationwide conversation about the need to revamp literacy instruction, but it's based on the idea that what we were doing is wrong and what we should be doing is clear. Now, there's a huge debate about whether it really is clear, but also we don't know how close were we to that goal or how different was it before, and also what was working when, where, and whom. So the idea that we're going to see some kind of a big change because we do any professional development, let alone a dinky little online module, which isn't little, it's expensive and time intensive, is pretty silly. Here, our trainings look a little bit different because they are created by other vendors, not by letters. And my understanding is that most of them still follow the same kind of a format of doing online modules and testing at the end. And so we can imagine that no matter how great the videos are, and my colleagues who have taken them have said that they are not going to win an Academy Award anytime soon, no matter how good they are, and I don't think they're great, they are probably not going to have the impact that we would imagine. So if we think about like reading reform as a black box, if you insert teacher training in foundational skills, you cannot expect that on the other end, you're going to see changes in instructional practices and then changes in achievement. You can expect to see zero changes in instructional practice and in achievement. We have a long history of logic that would show that. We have a long history of evidence that would show that. And we're still pouring lots and lots of money into trainings that we don't have evidence we need, and that we have pretty strong evidence won't make a difference even if we do it. It comes back to this reading, writing connection piece in part, because we are thinking about literacy as this atomized thing, like piece by piece by piece, instead of something that requires integration. And it also comes back to this idea of reciprocity that like knowing is not enough. Knowing and doing is not enough. Knowing and doing in community with aligned resources and coherent leadership, like we have to actually braid these things together. It isn't enough to invest a lot in one of them and then throw your hands up and say it's a crisis. Whenever we see anything that approaches looking like a miracle, it's because there is a comprehensive effort. Not only in terms of the reform itself is comprehensive, it's doing a bunch of different things at once, but also the approach is comprehensive. It's investing in not just reading, but also in writing. And I have to be clear about what I mean by writing, because I'm looking at some of these evaluation tools, like the Reading League has an evaluation tool and it has criteria for how do you rate whether the curriculum has good writing instruction. And they're looking at handwriting. Like, I know that I know there's research on script is a good idea, cursive is a good idea, and that's sure. But when we're talking about writing that has an impact on reading, or writing that has an impact on kids, engagement in school at all, or their self-efficacy, we're talking about composition, like taking a thought, putting it in language, making that language written. Like that process right there is what we're talking about. And that does not happen when we're just talking about letter formation. It doesn't happen when we're talking just about spelling. Spelling isn't unimportant, but that's not writing. It doesn't happen when we're talking about fill in the blanks. And that's one of the concerns I have about some of the approved programs in Connecticut is they have a significant amount of fill-ins. Most of the writing is writing about reading. So you read a story and then you get half a sentence filled out for you and like a blank to keep writing your response. So you're not coming up with an idea and turning it into language and putting that language on the page. You're taking a few words from the story and you're finishing somebody else's sentence. And it's not useful. It makes it so that when people are sitting there with their checklist to say, like, is this curriculum covering writing? Yes. Do kids write every day? Yes. Well, no, they don't. So there is a piece here about, what counts as writing instruction, what counts as reading instruction. And then there's this other piece of like, if we do this bit by bit, we're not going to get anywhere. We've got to think about the whole, and whole language has a whole bunch of branding challenges at the moment. But the idea that it should be holistic is actually more in line with neuroscience, more in line with cognitive science than anything else. I'm not saying whole language is a philosophy. I'm saying the idea that we need a holistic approach that considers motivation and engagement, that considers confidence and self-efficacy, that considers attention and sleep and hunger and wellness and other stressors. The idea that we need a comprehensive approach is much more in line with all the evidence that we have. And our policies that are written in the name of science are really calling us to do sort of the opposite. To say, if we focus in on this one piece, we're going to solve all the problems here. And it's a distraction, I think. It's an unfortunate distraction. It's an expensive distraction in every sense of the word. And same thing, they're doing the same thing to students as we're doing to teachers. And letters, I've been writing about that because it's an example of that. Whether it's that program or another, it's an example of that.
It's simplifying literacy. I remember when I was doing my dissertation, writing was a big part of it, and I was finding these. So we shifted the invitation to literacy. My study was all Native American students in a special program, a Saturday program. So I shifted the reading, because it was a reading and writing course. I shifted it to, let's just focus on Native authors and writers. Of course, the writing increased, everybody wanted to read more. But the themes that emerged, the reflections were so deep. And I remember one of my committee members said, count how many spelling errors there were at the beginning and in the end and stuff. So some of the quantitative data that I entered was on there. It was very easy to do, to go and say, all right, well, and not much change, but the length of the writing and the reflections, because people were reading about themselves, their history, their culture. And I had based that on, I asked students what they wanted to learn about. They wanted to learn about their language, their heritage, their culture, their history. And it was a dramatic thing. And people started reversing. At first, when I asked them what reading was, they said, well, it's saying words. What's writing? It's writing words. Then all of a sudden they started saying reading defends you from stereotypes. Writing allows you to tell your own story. So these were high school students that I remember the themes and saying, how do I tell this story? Because that was more important to me than when I went back and I saw, yes, you went from a paragraph to, a few pages of writing, over time. And yeah, I was glad that you wrote more, but it was really the content that was important. And that's other thing, like when I look at culturally relevant pedagogy and stuff. So my friend Lauren Anderson, who has Possible Futures Bookstore in New Haven, great bookstore, full of diverse books. It's a community hub. I usually go in and say, hey, I'm in the Mecca of literacy. And awesome. in Lauren's store. She goes, yeah, we like that word and stuff. But, the idea, are we giving students something worth reading, something worth writing about? And they have feelings, they have stuff. It's like, I was an old secondary English teacher, so we knew sex, drugs, and rock and roll sold. If you had something with that, kids would read it like crazy, talk all day long. And yes, I could talk about, I don't know, A Tale of Two Cities, but, I had to sell that differently. Like, imagine, would you give up your life for the woman you love so she can be with the man she loves. Would you do that? That kind
Yeah.
of woke up the kids a little bit, but
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't the same as if I could say, Jim Morrison died today, of a drug overdose. And what do you think about their songs and music and stuff? But anyway, yeah, it's part of that stuff. And getting back to the Mississippi, miracle, I think we
Hmm.
know from Rod Page's Texas miracle,
Right.
we start finding out his miracle was he had no high school dropouts. Until the Houston Chronicle printed that, and
Hmm.
parents started calling up the Houston Chronicle saying, "My son's right here, right now. He's dropped out. I want him back in school."
Yeah.
And they found 15,000 students in South Houston were dropped out. But with George Bush, he told him he had zero, and he would become our Secretary of State. So I always think when someone tells me about a miracle in literacy, I say, get ready for part two. It's
Right.
sort of like the guy that's going to sell you aluminum siding on your house. You're going to say, oh, your house is going to be beautiful. It's going to be wonderful. How much does it cost? Don't worry
Yeah.
about that. Don't worry about that. We got a plan for everybody. You're going to pay for the rest of your life. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Your first born,
God, that sounds good.
it's
Right.
sold and that kind of stuff. But it's going to look good
Yeah.
over there. But yeah, so I don't trust the miracles.
Nope.
The crisis always comes down to, usually for me, we're going to blame teachers and what teachers do.
Yeah.
And I have to be honest with this. When people ask me, because I've been an advocate for equity in our schools for decades now. And so black and brown parents will come to me every time the new scores come out. And they'll say, hey, Jesse, can what's going on? And I try to have a conversation around this piece. And I say, well, why don't we try equity first? $23 billion dollars a year spent on wealthy, predominantly white schools than we do on poor schools. What if we brought some equity in and we thought about that? Class sizes, special education teachers, literacy specialists,
Yeah.
those people with 2 years intensive training in literacy
Right.
coming into the classroom to help struggling readers.
Hmm.
I mean, I've got people all the time saying, "Well, we just need a body in there. Anybody can do it." But coming back to this notion, we always blame it on the teachers when the crisis comes. And when I'm talking to parents and communities, I say, your teachers did not pick this curriculum.
Right.
They did not make this choice. They had no say. Oftentimes it was pushed down their throats. So if you're going to blame them for what they're doing, then you should understand who made them do it, especially if you're a priority school district. The
Right.
state almost, if we're going to blame what teachers do, then we should blame the state for the programs that they're pushing on us, because I don't know any urban teachers that really feel empowered in their literacy instruction. Is
Right.
that accurate?
I think that's fair. I think
So we shouldn't blame them, right?
no, we shouldn't
They're
blame
not
them,
at
right?
fault.
No, we shouldn't. Absolutely not. That doesn't make any sense. Whether or not folks feel empowered, I think has a lot to do with the leadership in their individual school building. Are you empowered to use what you have to the best of your ability? It has to do with how your leaders have framed it and the freedom that they've given you, or the messages they've sent to you, either implicitly or explicitly. Like, what are you allowed to do? What do we encourage you to do? Are you allowed to bring yourself to this? How responsive can you be? I think there probably are examples of individual schools where the leadership is strong enough to make up for bad curriculum choices. Now more than ever, though, in Connecticut, we can't blame teachers for what they're teaching, because it is less their decision today than it might have been 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 15 years ago. I was just looking at the list of the programs that schools in Connecticut selected off the list the State Department made available. It says these are the approved programs you can choose from, and they published this list to see like who chose what. And they had a waiver process in theory. And they granted 5 waivers, but waivers for other commercial programs. There's only one district that has a waiver that says district created program, Wallingford. But there were many districts that put forth a program that they had developed with their teachers and their coaches over time. And in some cases, those were much more responsive to their communities, much more aligned to the assessments that we have to take, much more aligned to the strengths and opportunities in each of these individual districts. In some cases, you couldn't have bought anything better, but we're not allowed to use it. Because there's this idea that teachers don't know what they're doing, so we have to give them a program. And it's the idea that, if a district isn't doing well, or if school isn't doing well, the district takes it over. If a district isn't doing well, the state takes it over, as if somebody knows better, right? Instead of, kind of considering what are the strengths and opportunities here in this place that we can build on. We're going to take the decision making farther away from that local community and make decisions for them, about them, without them. So we've got one district that's allowed to do something that they created, but everybody else had to buy something. And most people had to buy something from a small list of things. And what I'm hearing the most about right now, not just in Connecticut, but certainly in Connecticut, is that, as they're adjusting to these new curricular programs, we're finding misalignment between what is taught when and how. Every program has to decide, are we going to teach this skill in the first 2 months of first grade, or is it going to come in the spring of first grade? Will it be in second or the beginning of third? They make slightly different decisions about that, and that's fine, except we also have a state list of assessments and progress monitoring tools that schools have to buy and have to use. You cannot create your own anymore. You can't choose something that's not on the list. And so we also have this sort of lockstep thing where you've got to know this by this time because we're about to test it. And if you haven't taught it, it's going to look like all of your kids fail this one skill, and then you're going to have to do remediation on something that you never taught in the first place. And we're finding all of these small details. If you talk to any first grade teacher, any literacy specialist, they'll be able to rattle them off for you. Kindergarten teacher, second grade teacher, same thing. It's this beginning stuff where there are so many skills that depend on one another. They'll be able to tell you exactly what doesn't match up, what we haven't taught yet, but we tested out, what we did teach, but aren't testing for another 6 months. So we'll never see the result of that until later. And so here are schools following directions, right? They're doing what the state told them that they had to do to improve their literacy scores, and literally being in a situation where they know they cannot get a good score because by following directions on curriculum and following directions on assessment, I know because they don't match that we're not going to have the scores that my students deserve because of the growth that they're making. So you have a choice. You can live with it. You can live with the scores kind of showing whatever they show. And if you're in a district that has a history of okay performance, that's probably all right. But if you're under the microscope because you have a history of chronic underperformance, that's not okay. Your other choice is to modify something about the curriculum, which means changing it. And the whole point was, you don't know what you're doing. You've got to do this program. But now we have to change it. We have to monkey with the order. We have to change what happens when. And when you change one thing, you've got to change others. A lot of schools also are, taking these new programs into existing infrastructure and finding misalignment with other curricular areas. They used to have some nice synergy between what they were doing in reading and what they were doing in science, or what they're doing in reading, what they're doing in social studies. Maybe they had a cool arts week going on. Maybe they had anything related to the community, related to the calendar, related to the cultures that are present. And that alignment's also gone. And then finally, just plain boring old alignment with the schedule. All of these programs, in order to make the cut for state evaluations, to say, yes, we've got all of the things that we need, we have all of the components we're supposed to address, they all are pretty long. They're 90 minutes, they're 110 minutes, they're 150 minutes if you were going to do all of the components. And schools have not allocated 150 minutes to reading in a day. Like, that's not a thing. So they still are selecting, choosing, cutting, deciding what to prioritize and what not to do. And so are we really getting, what we bought? Probably not. That's not because teachers aren't good at it. That's not because people are not trying their hardest. It's because we bought something that has nothing to do with, that was designed completely separately from a living organism, a school that operates in certain ways. And so, I have this same concern that you do around, like, are people empowered to do the best thing for the kids in front of them? Not by the state right now, no. Maybe by more local leadership. And I guess the clearest example of that right now is with this, there's $4.5 million in the budget for literacy coaches and no information about who they are, where they come from. Will they be certified? Who will certify them? They're going to be hired by the state to go into schools, which is similar to the Reading First sort of an idea,
Yeah.
but they won't be embedded in that community. They're going to go visit and tell people what to do. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah,
and
like that's
it's why when I was at the Massachusetts legislature, I
hmm
was trying to point out that the only one to blame is you.
yeah,
You know, the legislators are making decisions
hmm
that mandate curricula
yep,
in our schools
hmm
and oversight them, and, you know, the
right,
assessments, everything. So when we come back here in 6 years, and I remember telling them, I said, we could go back 100 years and I can do this. And
hmm
every time you decided that there was a literacy crisis, you instituted something that did not work. We
hmm
could do this, and you're about to do the same. Can I
right,
come back? Because that was my thing with the Massachusetts Teachers Union. I told
mm.
them, let's hold them accountable. And they were like, no, we need these people. And I'm like, no, let's put their names up. They said we should do this and hold on to it the next time it comes around,
hmm
because the MCAS test
hmm
will show what it always shows. The majority of
hmm
students are
yep,
not passing these assessments.
yep,
So it's one of those things. Can we talk about, you know, I've often found that when I look at the whole language teachers, what they were looking for,
hmm
they were chasing the books that would excite kids.
yeah,
And they really were good on that one. Harry
hmm
Potter was in, they made sure
yeah, right,
that all of that, they knew what books they were.
yeah,
Historical fiction was a big thing with them. And I remember kids reading chapter books
yep,
uh, over them, and great adolescent authors, because I'm
hmm
also thinking about what is the impact of this kind of instruction on our adolescents who
yeah,
also struggle with literacy.
sure,
What if we give them the very simplistic forms,
yep,
while we're not giving them anything worthwhile to read or something that they would be interested? Is there a connection between that? What about our older readers? That's what I'm
yeah,
saying.
100%. Um, it's interesting. I've been thinking about this a lot because if you look at the news right now, there's like two stories being told about adolescent and adult readers, teenagers, college kids, adults.
Yeah.
Like half of the headlines say nobody reads a book anymore. Nobody can read a book. Nobody will
Right.
read a book. We got a whole nation of illiterate people. I haven't met one yet, but we apparently have an entire nation of illiterate people. Then on the other side, I have all these headlines that say Barnes and Noble is making a comeback. Book Talk is responsible for more than $500 billion of sales. Like we have this resurgence of a literate culture on the one hand, and then also this like crisis narrative where like nobody's reading books, nobody's finishing books. No. So like, how do you make sense of both of those two things happening at once?
Right.
Now, the only other place that I know that this is happening or has happened is in England, and we are following England's reading policy about 5 to 10 years behind them, depending on the state. And they are also in this place where they've got all of the white papers, all of the reports saying leisure reading is down, adolescents don't read, but also all of the headlines saying Waterstone's books has made a major comeback, and there is poet laureates in small communities popping up that never used to sort of award, all of these sort of literary things. Dua Lipa is hosting a literary festival. You can go on book retreats, and you can go to these bars that are hosting bars in New York City and LA that are hosting lecture series, and they're sold out immediately. Like there is this sort of resurgence in some cases of what we would think of as a literate society, and then on the other side there's this whole like nobody reads a book anymore. Now I think there's a bunch of different things to play with here, and I don't have an answer, but I think it points to a few things that matter a lot for adolescent readers. One of them is like Book Talk is successful because it's doing everything that you're talking about, Dr. Turner was talking. It was like, these are books that you are going to be interested in. They're written by authors and about characters and about places and things that are of interest to you. And part of the reason they're of interest to you is because someone recommended it to you. When people study like what makes somebody buy a new, my poodle agrees, what makes somebody buy a book, like it's why we don't see very many billboards for books. There's billboards for movies. There's trailers on TV to get you to go see a movie. You don't see trailers for books. And part of it is, just not how the industry works. But part of it is because it probably wouldn't matter. What matters is if somebody says, hey, I read this, you're going to love it. Like when they interview people leaving Barnes and Noble, why did you choose what you choose? Because a friend of mine told me about it. And so book talk is basically just that on steroids, which is this sort of phenomenon on TikTok where people are recommending books. And not only are they recommending books, they're recommending like, you will be a person who, like I am a person who, I'm over here wearing the things I wear, talking the way that I talk, doing the things that I do with this many followers, and I read this book right here. It's a huge advertisement for a book because books are identity resources, you know, like what you're seen carrying around with you in the hallways, what you are, what you're able to, what conversations you're able to join into and talk with other people about. It's part of who you are. And so if the books that kids are offered in school are not things that they want in their identity kits, they're not going to identify with them and they won't identify with being a reader. Those same students very often do read quite a bit, but they won't call it reading. Like if you interview them and say, do you read? No. Have you read a magazine recently? Oh yeah, I read them every day. Do you read books? No. Have you read this play? Yes. I'm in plays every day, every Saturday in my community center. I do 4 plays a year. Like there is a disconnect here, and the disconnect is manufactured by the way that it's presented to folks in schools. You mentioned Houston. I was in Houston for a conference a couple weeks ago, and so I was trying to understand a little more of the local context, and I did some searching around and talking to colleagues who have moved down there and work in those schools. What I'm learning about Houston's situation, which is similar to ours in some ways and more extreme in others, is that there's news reporting that teachers really want to be able to teach entire books instead of just excerpts of books, but they've told the kids to hide it in their desk if an administrator walks by. School libraries, not only have we laid off school librarians in many cases, but they have cleared school libraries because we don't have to deal with book banning issues if there are no school libraries and are no books. We just do sanitized, neutral or not neutral, selected excerpts of things. And the thing that caught my eye in a news report about the school libraries that are no longer used as school libraries in Houston is that they are now used for like discipline.
Right. Yes. Disciplinary centers.
That's right. So like you can't go learn stuff there, but you can go to in-school suspension. Like
Right.
those very same places, which is like an irony. I don't think people are always talking about how like George Orwell already told us this would happen kind of a thing. I don't think you could be any more literary or poetic with that decision. But it's bad. So there's
No, it's 1984 stuff, but and it's interesting. The data connected to library use and access to books in libraries is solid.
Yeah.
And so, like, if I want to find readers in a school, I'll go to their library.
Yeah.
That's where I'll find them in there.
Yep.
What are they doing? They're sitting there talking about books and stuff, and what are they taking out and stuff like that. I trust the librarians if I want to find out.
Right.
And it's probably the definition. I've
That's
always
why
thought
they're
it's
the first
the
to go.
definition of reader.
Yeah.
You know, for me, a reader is a thinker. But I think for a lot of the miracle reformers, a reader is just somebody that
Scores well.
gives the voice to the text. And it's
Yeah.
interesting.
Reads quickly and accurately.
Reading used to be that way. When I've studied the history of reading, and the beginning, monks were afraid of you reading silently because you might become a heretic. You might ask yourself questions. So Saint Jerome was one of the ones, and they were very concerned, and reading was a very oral, out loud, because I wanted to make sure Rachel was reading the text accurately. So I can do that. So you had to read out loud.
Yeah.
So libraries were noisy. In the Library of Alexandria was a noisy place, and people were performing texts, and others were critiquing them to see how well they really parroted the text. That's what they were looking for in that piece. But thinking, and I remember reading about some of the monks who became saints were like worried about this oral reading, and oral reading was okay. It was safe because if you're reading biblical texts or sacred texts, you can't get them wrong if you just read them accurately. But if all of a
Mm.
sudden you say, turn the other cheek, and I might say, well, wait a minute. If you're going to hit my child, I'm not turning my other cheek. And people would have
Yeah.
these things. So
Yeah.
a reader to me has this stuff. We'll be
Yeah.
over there. We'll say, everyone should stop. Well, I'm going to say, not me. You
Yeah.
know,
Right. Right.
that kind of stuff. But so yeah, it's the definition of reading in some ways to me being a parroting of the text,
Hmm.
you know,
Hmm.
and that's the value of the reading writing connection.
Right.
Because in writing, I would say that that's a deep reflection. If I got to write about a book,
Hmm.
yes, I'm going to give you, it's going to be easy to give you the who, what, where, when, and why. But I
Right.
got to tell you why this is important or not important.
Right.
And it's just things. And then the culturally relevant stuff. I've
Hmm.
interviewed probably over 1,000 adults
Yeah.
in my work. So I was a
Mm.
literacy specialist, worked in this field. I don't know, I'm 70 now, so it's been well over 40 years
Yeah.
that I've done this. And in the interviews, there would be so many times, especially when I was interviewing a diverse group,
Hmm.
a person of color, an immigrant,
Hmm.
somebody in the LGBT community. There was a moment, often they'll talk about, they remember the moment when they felt like they weren't a reader, but especially when they felt they were a reader, it was when they read a book that they saw themselves in it. So,
Hmm.
and it was amazing.
Hmm.
And that kept coming up time and time again. And I'm
Wow.
thinking about, we need to find those books for our readers
Yeah.
over there. What are the
Yep.
books that would, when Rudine Sims Bishop says
Hmm.
mirrors, mirrors, windows, and sliding doors,
Yeah.
and I remember I was having a conversation with Rudine Sims Bishop. It's good to be old because you get to know a lot of
You get
people.
to know these people. That's so
And this
cool.
is this is the godmother of multicultural literature. And Rudine Sims, I was asked me. She saw I had Ernest Gaines had a book called Lesson Before Dying, black
Mm.
author, Lesson Before Dying, powerful book, a book about a black man who is on trial for murder. He's going to be convicted. His family knows he's going to be convicted because he's
Hmm.
black. It's in the 40s, and the parents want one of the sons. There's two mothers. There's really two mothers. So one mother knows her son is going to be convicted even before the trial starts, and they're going to kill him. And she goes to the other mother. She says, "I want your son, who was a teacher." And she
Mm.
says, I want you to go to him because they talk about him as a pig, and he's beginning to talk about himself as a pig. It's a
Mm.
powerful story. And so
Hmm.
Rudine Sims said, did you walk a mile in this character's shoes?
Mm.
It's that kind of book. So the sliding doors. And she would say to me,
Yeah.
Jesse, you see the mirror? It's important to you.
Yeah.
Sliding doors help you appreciate and learn how to respect others. And she said,
Hmm.
if you can walk through that sliding door, you have walked a mile in that person's shoes, and you truly value and understand them. But I remember that
Mm.
with that stuff, and
Yeah.
I remember telling her, yes, I remember reading that and saying, parts of the book made me cry in terms of
Mm.
that,
Hmm. Hmm.
and saying, depending on where I am, I often tell people about an experience I had with Isabel Allende's book,
Hmm.
House of Spirits. I was
Hmm.
in O'Hara Airport, and I'm reading the chapter where she discovers all the bodies and
Yes.
stuff that they've been
Yeah.
looking for, the
Hmm.
missing. And
Hmm.
and I'm just raging with tears. And of course I'm in the airport, so I can't stop breathing. So I throw my coat over me, my jacket, and I'm still
Good
reading,
idea.
trying to read with a
Yeah.
little bit of light and crying away. And so when people talk to me about readers, I'm saying that's a reader.
Yeah.
The reader that, although he's crying, can't stop
Yeah.
reading.
Yeah.
Although
Yeah.
he's got to cover it up, but he's got to leave a little bit of light to be able
Right.
to see the book
Just the
and still
flashlight
read
under the
on.
covers.
Yeah,
Yes.
so I'm often I think about,
Yes.
probably we should talk about assessment.
Sure.
We're not assessing that.
No.
We're
Yeah.
not assessing. How about we assess the kids? I always knew that if I can, when I work with struggling readers, if I could assess them with a book they loved, You
Very
liked
different.
if you like robots, I'd give you a book on robots or whatever
Yep.
it was. If I did that, you did better, of course.
Yeah.
And you
Yep.
stayed long, you were engaged longer. Your
Yes.
stamina was
Hmm.
greater with the things that you like and you appreciate. But
Yeah.
we don't do that. But in assessment, what is the state of assessment right now? Are we assessing readers or are we assessing parrots?
Progress monitoring assessments, the all a couple times a year, we're mostly assessing oral reading fluency. We're assessing your ability to parrot, and that leaves out all kinds of readers, the thoughtful ones.
Well,
It leaves out folks that don't have the same speedy connections between their eyes and their minds and their mouths. It leaves out kids whose oral articulation of words doesn't make sense to the person listening to them, and so they mark it as wrong, even like whether it is or it isn't. And it also leaves out kids that knew what it said, but said something else, which we do all the time. As teachers that
yes.
have done read alouds, like I saw it, I knew it, I said, but, it's a little bit different. Um, my advisor, my PhD advisor, Richard Allington, used to say that you should measure whether kids get goosebumps when they read. That'd be a pretty good indication. And then the other really easy way to do it, you wouldn't have to spend like 20 minutes 3 times a year per kid. There's assessment reduction task forces right now nationally, but also in Connecticut, trying to figure out how much time kids are being assessed, because it's significant at every grade level and it is inappropriate in the early grades. And you could just ask them, are you reading anything right now, and do you have a plan about what to read next, and you would get the exact same information.
Yeah.
you know
Doing Race to the Top
yeah.
and No Child Left Behind. The reason I walked from Connecticut to DC was
Mm-hmm.
because talking to teachers, particularly Hartford teachers I worked with,
Mm-hmm.
they were talking about how much time they were assessing
Yep.
during those times.
Yep.
And I calculated, I said, well, let's put it up. How many hours is this? What do
Yeah.
we do? I had reading teachers and bilingual teachers. I don't see the kids until well into October because we've been
Mm-hmm.
doing all the
Right.
assessments that are
Right.
required. So I
Mm-hmm.
don't, and so we calculated the time, and it seemed to me that in those days it was 6 to 8 weeks
Yeah.
assessment time.
Yeah.
And so my piece was like, you don't learn anything from testing. You may learn about something, but
Uh-huh.
you don't increase the learning by taking a test, doesn't
No.
increase my learning.
Mm-mm.
And it's a loss of instructional time. And that
Yes.
was one of the reasons I decided to walk.
Mm.
Really wasn't even arguing for one methodology over another or
Right.
any program. I was
Right.
arguing for that you're spending so much time testing kids, which usually doesn't motivate anyone to become a reader
Right.
at all.
Right.
And that's the stuff. But I remember that. But
Yeah.
so how are we doing those assessments? You're saying the progress monitoring, which is
Mhm.
that's we do that a few times a year.
We do that a few times a year by law, 3 times a year until second grade. Then it can be 2 or 1 if you're scoring okay. You can kind of if you are still scoring like we need to be paying close attention to your scores, then it's 3 times a year until the end of third is when the law stops. But that doesn't, and a lot of local policies will say we keep going. The older kids get, the better it gets in terms of progress monitoring, only because the tools we have for progress monitoring aren't very good for middle school and high school. And so there are plenty of high schools that are exploring universal screening options, but really coming up with nothing exciting, and kind of going with the least abhorrent of them instead of the best of them. But in the early grades, there's a lot of testing and it's a lot of repetition. All of these new programs also have testing that comes with them. They have internal kinds of assessments that come with their units and their skill builders and whatever. And as folks are just trying to, roll them out for the first couple of years and get used to them, they have to try all these things out. And so there's even more testing, I think, last year, this year, and probably for another 1 or 2, because people are trying to figure out, of all of this stuff, what makes the most sense, what isn't repetitive, what actually tells us something that we can use, what actually tells us something that we need. I do have concerns and real questions about the value and utility of oral reading fluency. I understand what it predicts. I don't understand why it gets so much attention and so much time. So there's a piece there. We also know that we can look at kids' spelling and get pretty much the same information. So you could give a 10, 20 word spelling quiz to a first grader and you would get something very similar to their oral reading score. You'd be able to sort of make the same kinds of groups, but it wouldn't depend on that oral performance. You also could do it for the whole class at one time. So you're not, constantly pulling someone in the hallway and giving everybody else busy work or computer work or something so that they can complete those tests. I try and help pre-service teachers have an imagination for a world they didn't live in. But, we don't have to do it this way. We don't have to have universal screens at all. And if we do have them, they could look really different. We don't have to rely on standardized testing to tell us if we're doing a good job. We just don't have an imagination at the moment of any other way to still be responsible, and still have this sort of data-driven kind of idea about schools without them. But we certainly can get the information that we need other ways. We certainly can de-emphasize them and sort of quiet quit them if we have to for a little while and look for the things we need to look for, which is, have I heard you reading recently? Do you know what, do you have a book in your browsing bin you're looking forward to reading? And have I seen you writing recently? And are you writing about something you care about?
All right, we're coming down to our last 5 minutes. It's reminding me of my old professor, Yetta Goodman, who always tells stories by a student that she does. And she had a student, she said, I was in a classroom when she was supervising student teachers. Now, for Yetta, that now we're talking 60 years ago for her. And she's talking about people raising their hands every time. So anyway, she would say, talk to the child. You learn everything you need. Kid watch.
100%.
Thank you, Rachel, for being our guest today.
Thank you for having me.
What it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop, children. What's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.